Hi, welcome to Petradot. And in this lesson, we are going to be learning two-dimensional array. Recall that in our previous lesson, we said that an array is a variable that holds multiple values of the same type. And we also said that we have three types of array, which include the one-dimensional array, the two-dimensional array, and the multi-dimensional arrays, which we also discussed the single-dimensional array to be something like this, where you you just where a single dimensional array is used to hold just multiple values of a particular variable. All right, so in this class we are focusing on two-dimensional array. Now, to define a two-dimensional array, um, you just need to do something like this. Int, for example, let's say that our type is going to be an integer. We want to hold uh, integer values in a table, right? So we are going to be having two blocks and we'll have something like this table. Now, before I continue, two-dimensional array comes to play when you want to represent things like a table or a matrix. Yes, when you have something like values that are in a table or in a matrix, that is when a two-dimensional array comes to play in a program, right? So hence, in a two-dimensional array, we used to have two block brackets preceding it whenever you're going to define it. And what they represent is just the row and the column. Yes. So it means that this row and column are going to be used by the indices to either assign values to each position of the table or to get the value in a particular position. At this point, we just defined a variable which is of type two-dimensional array. Now, to initialize this variable, you have something like table equals to new int followed by two block brackets, right? And then these two block brackets will contain the length of the row and column. Let's say, for example, our row is going to be 2 and our column is going to be 3. We just defined a two-dimensional array right now, right? With row length to be 2 and column to be 3, right? So now to assign values to this table, we will need the index of each of the row, each of this item. Note that I am trying to represent this particular table here that is in this comment section here. So for us now, for example, to be able to assign this, now let's analyze this here. This 20 is actually on row 0 and column 0. I've already picked the index I need to be able to assign it. So for me to assign 20 to the first item of the row, I'm going to be having table at position 0 at row 0, 0 column 0 will be what? Equals to 20. And for me to assign the second row, which is table, let's say this 30, and I want to assign this 30, we are still on what? Row 0 and column 1. So I'm going to be having table at position 0 and row 0 column 1 is equal to what? 30. Now, I've just did that of 30. For me to assign 40, which is the last item of row 0, I'll be pointing at what? Row 0 column 2, right? Which is table row 0 column 2 equals to 40. Now, if I want to assign the items of the second row, which is row 1, the first item 50 is on row 1 column 0, I'll be having something like table row 1 column 0 to be 50. The same applies to if I want to assign that of 60, it is row 1 column 1. So I'll be having table row 1 column 1 is equals to 60. And then 70 row 1 column 2 is going to be having table row 1 column 2 as 70. And that is how to assign these items, the items to a particular table or a matrix, especially when you want to present a table or a matrix. So creating a two-dimensional array is just as simple as this, and then you use the indices to assign the values. Now, for you to also access these values that are in each of these positions, you will need the indices to be able to do that. right? You must specify the row and the column index for you to be able to pick out the item in a particular position of the table. Now, how do you do that? Let's say, for example, I want to print out 60. What do I need to do that? 60 is in row 1, column 1. So I will need this exactly as it is to be able to do that, which is system.out.println table at position row 1, column 1. So running this now should return 60 for us. Exactly. And we have 60 in our output, right? So the same applies. Let's say I want to print out 40. I will need row 0 at column 2 to be able to access 40 rows. So running this program will give me 40. But then let's say I want to print this as a table. I want to iterate over all these items and print them one after the other. That is when the loop comes in. Remember before we discussed about having a loop inside another loop. Now this is where it is important here now. Something like when you are trying to iterate over a table or a matrix, that is when you have a loop inside a loop. How? Because, let me bring out this and I remove now. Because assuming that you have something like this, let me recreate this. Assuming we have something like, let's say we define this table to be this way, equal to, let's say we have this our item like this now. Now watch, this table is a two-dimensional array with the first item to be an array, second item to be an array, also the third item to be an array, right? If I am to loop through this table right now, I'm going to loop through only 3 items, which is the row 1, 2, 3. That is with a single loop. And let us do that. Let's say, for example, for me to loop through this, I can use a for loop, which is for int row equal to 0. Row is less than table.length, row plus plus. So I have int row. I can even call it, okay, let me just use int. Okay, let's leave it at row so that it be clear. Int row equals to 0. Row is less than table.length, which is this table because it's an array, dot length, then row plus plus. Then I want to print out each of the row items, right? System dot out dot print line let me print all of them as an object. Arrays dot to string table at position row. So running this now will just loop only 3 times and print the items for me exactly as it is on the row. You can see it on the output where we have row 1 to be 1, 2, 3, row 2 to be 4, 5, 6, and row 3 to be 7, 8, 9. So this, what it is doing is for each of the rows, so it came to row 0 and printed the strange format of it for me. At that point, row is still 0. It incremented by 1. Row is now 1. And at position 1, row is 4, 5, 6. It's printed it as a string 2. It now incremented row again. And then it became 2. Then it came here. This is position 2. It printed 7, 8, 9 for me, right? And then printed this. That is exactly what is happening here. So this thing actually looped only 3 times. Now, but I want to print each of these items one after the other, not as a string of array, right? String dot to array. I don't want to print it as a string straight and just print only 3 rows. No, I want to pick each of these items. Imagine you have an operation you need to do for each of the items. Let's say coming to each number in the table, do something like this to that particular number. Then you will need to loop through, access this item using their indices, right? That is when you will need another loop inside this loop, because this row is actually pointing at this line. I need something to point at the columns for me, each of the items. And that thing is having another loop that will loop through each of these items whenever you come to each row. So now that you have come to row 0 for me, what do you do? Before you go to the next row, do another loop for me, which is for, I'll call it column. For int column equals to 0, column is less than table at position row. this row now can be position 0 dot length. So it means if you come to position 0, pick the length for me. And with what we are seeing here, the length is actually 3. So when you pick the length, loop through it, and when you are looping, keep incrementing this for me, right? So when you loop at column 0, let's say you are now in the first row and you start looping. Coming to the first item, which is column 0, what do? Print that item for me. And how do you print the item? Remember that to access an item in a two-dimensional array, you need two indices, which is the first index for the row and the second index for the column, right? So I'm using this space here so that to separate the next item from the one it has printed already. That's why I'm using this space here. All right, so I need the row and the column with this table to be able to access each of the item, and that is what is happening here. So I'm printing out each of the items one after the other. So when you are done for each, when you finish the first row, when you come to the first row, loop through the item, then go to the next row. But before you go to the next row, please step to the next line. Don't print it on the next line. Remember, we're using here, watch. I guess you still understand that we'll have the difference between print and print line. So the print will always print the items in the same line. But when we say print line, it prints the item in the whole line and goes to the next line for the next that the item is going to print, right? So after looping through these items in the row, just go to the next line before you loop through the next row. That is exactly what is happening here. All right, let us run this program now and see. All right, you can see it now. We have our items printed one after the other. Imagine I want to do something to each of these items in particular. Let's say I want to multiply all by 2, right? Item times 2. And that is the reason why I want to access each of them. So I can now put it in brackets here. For example, the item in each row. So, sorry, for example, let's say we're in row 0. The item in row 0, column 0, multiplied by 2, which is 1 times 2 should be giving me 2 here at this point. So let's run this program and see. You can see now it has multiplied all the item. So to using the indexes to loop through this table is necessary when you want to perform a particular action to each of the item. But let's say I don't need this index, I just wanted to print out the items. I can use a for each loop to access these items. How? Let me do something like this. For each int row in table, for each row in this table, what do you do for me? Now loop through others. For each row, do this for me. For int column co equals to 0, which is similar to what we had before. System.out.println .print, then system.out.println. Exactly. So for each of the row in this table, that's what I'm now doing. Instead of using for loop before, and I have another for loop inside the for each. So I now say for each of the row, loop through the items in the row. That is printing out all the columns for me, and then separate each with a line. All right, let's run it and see. We still have what we had before. So to recap, we say that the two-dimensional array, the difference between the two-dimensional array and the single-dimensional array is that each of the items in the array is an array on itself. Yes, each of the items is an array of itself. So, and to define a two-dimensional array, you will need these two blocks, the two indices, for you to be able to assign value or to pick an item from the table. And the two-dimensional array is important whenever you are going to be working with a table or a matrix, right? So if you have items that are represented in a table, then you are going to be needing the two-dimensional array for you to be able to navigate through these items, right? Okay, and that will be the end of this lesson. If you have any question or confusion or need further explanation, anywhere that you are getting confused, just drop it on the comment section. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you.